At 29, Obinna Okoro had already built the kind of life most people could only imagine. His companies dominated construction, technology, real estate, and logistics. Thousands of employees depended on his decisions, skyscrapers carried his name, and luxury cars moved through the gates of his corporate headquarters every day. Newspapers praised his rise from poverty to extraordinary wealth, while strangers admired him, envied him, and wondered how one man could achieve so much, so young. But behind the headlines, the tailored suits, and the billion-naira empire was a truth no one saw. Obinna was completely alone. That evening, he sat silently in the back seat of his black luxury car as it moved through the rain-slicked streets of Lagos. Motorcycles slipped between vehicles, vendors approached traffic with snacks and drinks, and neon lights reflected across the wet road. The city was alive around him, but Obinna felt disconnected from all of it. "Sir, we'll reach the office in 10 minutes, his driver said. Obinna nodded without answering. His mind was still inside the expensive restaurant he had left 2 hours earlier, replaying the end of another relationship with another beautiful woman who seemed more interested in his fortune than the man behind it. "Obinna, I don't understand why you keep delaying this," she had said, frustration sharpening her voice. She wanted marriage, access, status, and the life his name could provide. But when Obinna looked into her eyes, he saw the same hunger he had seen before. She loved everything surrounding him, but she did not truly know him. That night, as Lagos rushed past his window, Obinna made a decision that would change his life. He would step away from the wealth, hide his identity, and discover whether anyone could care for him when they believed he had nothing. Her voice had carried irritation. "What exactly do you want?" he had asked calmly. She had leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I want security." Obinna had frowned slightly. "You already have security." "No," she corrected. "Real security." She had then pulled out her phone and shown him pictures of a luxurious mansion in one of Lagos's most expensive neighborhoods. "I want us to live here," she said confidently. Obinna had stared at the screen for a few seconds. "The mansion costs more than many companies." "You expect me to buy that now?" he asked. She shrugged casually. "You can afford it." Something about the way she said those words had pierced him deeply. Not because he couldn't afford the house, but because of what it meant. He had looked at her carefully and asked the question that had been forming in his mind for weeks. "If I lost everything tomorrow, would you still want to be with me?" The woman laughed, not kindly, not playfully, but dismissively. "Why would I stay with a poor man when I can be with you?" That had been the moment Obinna realized the truth. She wasn't in love with him. She was in love with the life he could give her. And just like that, another relationship ended. The car slowed as it approached a red traffic light. Obinna opened his eyes and looked outside again. A young couple walked along the sidewalk holding hands. They wore simple clothes, laughing about something as they shared roasted corn bought from a roadside vendor. They didn't look rich, but they looked happy. The sight stirred something uncomfortable inside him. Obinna had spent years building wealth, influence, and respect. Every achievement had pushed him higher in society. But the higher he climbed, the harder it became to trust anyone around him. Women smiled at him everywhere he went. At business events, charity galas, private parties, even in random places like airports or restaurants. First, it had felt flattering, but over time he began noticing patterns. Their questions were always the same. "What kind of car do you drive? Where do you live? How many companies do you own? How many countries have you traveled to?" Very few ever asked the questions he secretly wished someone would ask. "What makes you happy? What are you afraid of? What kind of person are you when no one is watching?" Obinna sighed softly. Sometimes he wondered if anyone would ever truly see him. Not the billionaire, not the successful businessman, just him. The traffic light turned green and the car moved again. Soon they arrived at his office building, one of the most impressive skyscrapers in the city. Security guards quickly opened the car door as Obinna stepped out. Inside, employees greeted him respectfully. "Good evening, sir. Welcome back, sir. Sir, the board meeting documents are ready." Obinna nodded politely to each of them, but his mind still felt heavy. After a few hours of reviewing reports and signing documents, he finally decided to leave for the night. But instead of going straight home, he made an unexpected request. "Drive," he told his driver. "Where to, sir?" the man asked. "Just drive around the city." The driver nodded and started the engine. For nearly an hour, they drove through different parts of Lagos. Busy markets, crowded streets, small neighborhoods filled with life. Obinna rolled down the window slightly, allowing the sounds of the city to enter the car. People laughed, children played, music played from small shops. The energy felt real, raw, honest. Eventually, the car stopped at another traffic light. Right beside them stood a roadside food stall. A middle-aged man stood behind it, stirring a large pot of rice and stew while customers gathered around. The man laughed loudly with them. Someone cracked a joke. Another person paid for food. The seller served them quickly, wiping sweat from his forehead as he worked. Despite the heat, the noise, and the simple environment, the man looked happy, genuinely happy. Obinna watched the scene closely. None of those people knew who that man was beyond what they saw, just a hardworking food seller. Yet, they treated him warmly. They joked with him. They trusted him. No one expected anything from him except good food. The simplicity of it struck Obinna deeply. His mind began turning. A strange thought slowly formed. What if he could meet someone who didn't know anything about his wealth? Someone who didn't see his expensive watches or luxury cars. Someone who only saw a regular man. Would that person treat him differently? Would that person love him differently? The idea grew stronger with every passing second. By the time the light turned green again, Obinna was already thinking seriously about it. Back in the car, he leaned forward slightly. "Emeka," he said to his driver. "Yes, sir. Tell me something." The driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Yes, sir." If a man wanted to know who truly cared about him, what would he do? The driver looked confused for a moment. Then he shrugged slightly. "Sir, I think the only way to know that is when people don't know what you have." Obinna slowly smiled. That answer confirmed the thought already forming in his mind. By the time he arrived home, the idea had become a decision. The next morning, he called his closest friend and business partner. When the man arrived, Obinna explained everything. "I want to disappear for a while," he said calmly. His friend blinked in surprise. "Disappear?" "Yes." "For how long?" "A few months." "And why exactly would a billionaire want to disappear?" Obinna leaned back in his chair. "Because I want to meet someone who will love me without knowing who I am." His friend stared at him for several seconds. Then he burst out laughing. "You must be joking." "I'm not." The laughter slowly faded as his friend realized he was serious. "You mean pretend to be poor?" Obinna nodded. "Yes." His friend shook his head in disbelief. "This is the craziest idea you've ever had." "Maybe," Obinna admitted. "But I need to know something." "What?" "Whether real love exists for someone like me." Silence filled the room. Finally, his friend sighed. "If you're serious, what exactly are you planning to do?" Obinna stood up and walked toward the window, looking down at the busy streets below. People moved everywhere. Some rich, some poor, some happy, some struggling. Yet, among them were countless stories of real love. He turned back with determination in his eyes. "I'm going to become someone no one would ever expect." His friend raised an eyebrow. "And who is that?" Obinna smiled. "A roadside food seller." That decision would change everything, because somewhere in the city, without either of them knowing it yet, a young woman named Amara was about to walk into his life, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 weeks after Obinna made his shocking decision, very few people in the world knew what he was about to do. His business partner knew, his personal driver knew, and the elderly woman who managed his family house knew. Everyone else believed Obinna Okoro had simply taken a short vacation to clear his mind. In reality, the young billionaire was preparing for the strangest experiment of his life. Early one morning, before the city fully woke up, Obinna stood in front of a large mirror inside one of the guest houses on his private property. Spread across the table behind him were items that looked completely out of place for someone of his status. Old clothes, torn singlet, pair of worn trousers, cheap rubber sandals, a faded cap, even a small plastic stool. His friend, Chaik, leaned against the wall watching him with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "I still can't believe you're actually doing this," Chaik said. Obinna adjusted the cap in the mirror. "I told you I was serious." Chaik shook his head slowly. "Do you know how many men in this country would kill to have the life you're running away from?" "I'm not running away," Obinna replied calmly. "I'm searching." "For what exactly?" Obinna paused before answering. "For truth." Chaik folded his arms. "You think pretending to be poor will help you find love?" "I don't know," Obinna admitted. But I know this. Every woman I've met since becoming wealthy sees my money before they see me. He turned around to face his friend. I want to know what happens when the money disappears. Chaik stared at him for a moment. You do realize this might not go the way you imagine. I know. You might meet people who treat you badly. I know. You might experience insults, disrespect, humiliation. Obinna shrugged slightly. Then I'll learn something. Chaik sighed. Well, if you're going to do this, we should do it properly. They spent the next several days preparing the disguise. Obinna shaved his beard unevenly so it looked rough and neglected. His expensive haircut was replaced with a messy, ordinary style. His hands, usually soft from office work, were deliberately dirtied with cooking oil and charcoal stains. Chaik even insisted they practice his new job. You cannot just stand behind a food stall and look confused, Chaik said one afternoon while placing a large cooking pot on a small gas burner. If you're going to sell food, you must actually know how to cook it. Obinna laughed. I can cook. Cooking at home is not the same as cooking for hungry customers who are waiting in line. For several days, Obinna practiced preparing simple roadside meals: rice, beans, stew, fried plantain, egg sauce. He burned food several times. He oversalted a pot of beans. Once, he accidentally spilled an entire bowl of stew on the ground. Chaik laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. Billionaire chef, he teased. Be careful or your customers will run away. But slowly, Obinna improved. Soon he could cook large portions quickly and efficiently. By the end of the week, even Chaik admitted the food tasted surprisingly good. Not bad, he said while chewing thoughtfully. Maybe you won't starve your customers after all. The next step was choosing a location. Obinna didn't want a wealthy neighborhood where people might recognize him. He needed somewhere busy but ordinary, a place where roadside vendors were common. Eventually, they found the perfect street. It was a lively area filled with small shops, mechanic workshops, tailoring stalls, and street vendors selling everything from fruit to roasted corn. Workers passed through the street every day. Students walked by after school. Taxi drivers often stopped to eat. It was the perfect place for a small roadside food stall. Very early on a Monday morning, before the sun fully rose, Obinna arrived with Chick to set everything up. They carried a wooden table, cooking pots, a gas cylinder, plastic plates, and a small umbrella for shade. Obinna wore his new disguise: the torn singlet, the faded trousers, the worn sandals. If anyone had seen him that morning, they would never have guessed he owned companies worth millions. Chaik stepped back and examined him carefully. Well, he said, you look convincing. Obinna looked down at his clothes, felt strange. For years he had worn designer suits and expensive watches. Now he looked like a man struggling to survive. Are you nervous? Chaik asked. A little. That's normal. Obinna took a deep breath. This is really happening. Yes, Chaik said. The billionaire roadside chef. They both laughed. By the time the sun rose fully over the street, Obinna's small food stall was ready. The first customers arrived sooner than he expected. 2 mechanics from a nearby workshop approached the stall. Morning, one of them said. Morning, Obinna replied. You just opened here? Yes. What are you selling? Rice, beans, stew, and plantain. The men looked at each other. How much? Obinna told them the price. They nodded approvingly. Serve us 2 plates. His heart beat faster as he prepared their food. This was the moment his strange new life truly began. He carefully scooped rice and beans onto 2 plastic plates, added stew, and placed fried plantain on the side. The mechanics took their food and sat nearby on wooden benches. After a few bites, one of them nodded. This is good. Relief washed over Obinna. Thank you, he said. Soon more customers began arriving. A taxi driver, a woman selling fruit nearby, 2 students wearing backpacks. Each person treated him like any other roadside vendor. Some spoke politely. Some barely looked at him. One man complained loudly about the price. Obinna noticed something interesting. Without his expensive appearance, people behaved very differently around him. At business meetings, people always smiled carefully. They spoke with respect. They chose their words cautiously. But here on the roadside, people were completely honest. If they liked the food, they said so. If they didn't, they complained. Some customers even joked with him. By afternoon, the heat became intense. Sweat rolled down Obinna's face as he stirred the large pot of beans. This kind of work was far more physically demanding than sitting in an air-conditioned office. Yet strangely, he didn't hate it. In fact, there was something refreshing about it. No board meetings, no corporate politics, just simple work and simple conversations. During a quiet moment, a small boy approached the stall. He looked about 8 years old. The boy stared longingly at the food but didn't say anything. Obinna noticed immediately. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently. The boy nodded shyly. "Do you have money?" The boy shook his head. Without hesitation, Obinna served him a small plate of rice and beans. "Here," he said. The boy's eyes widened. "Thank you." He sat nearby and ate happily. Watching him reminded Obinna of his own childhood. He had not grown up wealthy. His parents had worked hard to provide for their family. Obinna had never forgotten those early struggles. Perhaps that was why the roadside environment didn't feel completely foreign to him. The day passed quickly. By evening, most of the food was sold. Obinna stretched his back tiredly as he cleaned the cooking pots. Chaik arrived shortly after. "Well?" his friend asked. "How was your first day as a food seller?" Obinna wiped sweat from his forehead. "Hard work." Chaik laughed. "You expected it to be easy?" "No, but it was interesting." "In what way?" Obinna thought carefully before answering. "People behave differently when they think you are poor." Chaik nodded. "That's the world." Obinna leaned against the stall. "But it also means that when someone is kind to you, it's real." Chaik smiled slightly. "So, the experiment has begun." "Yes. What now?" Obinna looked around the street. People were still walking past. Vendors were still shouting prices. The city continued moving as it always did. "Now," he said quietly, "we wait." Chaik folded his arms. "You're waiting for a woman to magically appear and fall in love with a roadside food seller?" Obinna chuckled. "Not exactly." "What then?" "I'm waiting to see who treats me with kindness." Chaik shook his head with amusement. "You're crazy, maybe." But deep inside, Obinna felt something different. For the first time in years, he was stepping outside the carefully controlled world of wealth and influence. Here, no one cared who he was. He was simply another man trying to earn a living. And somewhere among the thousands of people who would pass this street, someone might see him. Not the billionaire, not the businessman, just a man. Neither Obinna nor Chaik knew it yet, but in just a few days a young woman named Amara would walk down that very street, and a simple act of kindness would begin a love story neither of them could have imagined. The third day of Obinna's new life as a roadside food seller began like the two before it. Hot, noisy, and full of strangers who passed his stall without noticing him. By now, the street was already becoming familiar to him. Every morning the mechanic workshop across the road opened first. The loud sound of metal tools hitting engines would echo through the street as men in oil-stained clothes began repairing cars. Soon after that, the fruit seller arrived arranging bright oranges, bananas, and pineapples carefully on her wooden table. Then came the tailor sweeping dust from the front of his small shop while humming old high-life music. Life on the street moved with its own rhythm. By 7 a.m., Obinna had already finished cooking the first batch of rice and beans for the day. Steam rose from the large metal pot as he stirred it slowly with a wooden spoon. His singlet clung to his body because of the heat. Sweat rolled down his face. Just a few weeks ago, he had been sitting inside an air-conditioned office signing contracts worth millions. Now he stood on the roadside cooking food under the blazing sun, and strangely he didn't regret it. At first the work had felt exhausting, but something about the simplicity of it had begun to calm his mind. No one here expected him to make billion-dollar decisions. All they wanted was good food. Around 8 a.m., the morning rush began. Taxi drivers stopped to grab breakfast before starting work. Students passed by on their way to school. Shop owners bought food before opening their businesses. 2 plates of rice. Add extra stew. Give me beans and plantain. The small stall became busy quickly. Obinna moved as fast as he could, serving food and collecting payments. "Thank you," he said politely to each customer. Most of them barely looked at him. Some grunted in response. One impatient customer even snapped his fingers loudly. "Hurry up, I'm late." Obinna simply nodded and continued working. If this had happened in his office, that same man would probably have greeted him respectfully with a handshake. But here he was, just another roadside vendor. The contrast fascinated him. By midday the rush had slowed. The sun hung high in the sky and the street grew quieter as many people retreated indoors to escape the heat. Obinna wiped sweat from his forehead and stretched his tired arms. Just then he noticed someone walking slowly toward the stall. It was a young woman. She carried a small bag of groceries in one hand and walked with calm, steady steps. What caught Obinna's attention immediately was not her beauty, though she was certainly beautiful. It was her expression. She looked thoughtful, peaceful. Unlike many people on the busy street, she didn't appear rushed or impatient. When she reached the stall, she gave him a small, polite smile. "Good afternoon," she said gently. Obinna looked up, slightly surprised by the greeting. Most customers simply ordered food without greeting him. "Good afternoon," he replied. Her voice was soft but clear. "Do you have rice and beans?" "Yes." "How much is it?" Obinna told her the price. She nodded and opened her small purse. "Please give me 1 plate." As he served the food, he noticed she stood patiently without checking her phone or looking irritated the way many customers did. When he handed her her plate, she thanked him. "Thank you." Her tone was genuine, not forced, not careless. She walked to a nearby wooden bench and sat down to eat. Obinna returned to cleaning the cooking pot, but a few minutes later, he noticed something strange. The young woman was looking at him, not rudely, not suspiciously, just observing him quietly. Finally she spoke. "Excuse me." Obinna looked up. "Yes? Have you eaten today?" The question caught him completely off guard. For a moment, he didn't know how to answer. In all the days he had been working at the stall, no one had asked him that. Customers bought food and left. No one cared whether the seller had eaten. "I'm fine," he said casually, but the young woman frowned slightly. "You look tired." Obinna chuckled softly. "That's part of the job." She looked down at her plate of food for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she stood up and walked back to the stall. "I'd like another plate," she said. "Another one?" "Yes." Obinna served the food and placed it on the counter. She paid for it and gently pushed the plate toward him. "This one is for you." Obinna blinked in confusion. "For me?" "Yes," she said simply. "You should eat too." For a moment, he just stared at the plate. The gesture was so unexpected that he felt strangely emotional. This woman didn't know him. She had no idea he was one of the richest men in the country. Yet, she had just spent her own money to make sure he ate. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled. "You're welcome." She returned to her bench and continued eating. Obinna slowly sat down on his small stool and began eating the food. For the first time since starting this experiment, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe this crazy plan of his wasn't so foolish after all. After finishing her meal, the young woman stood up and carried her empty plate back to the stall. "Thank you. The food was very good," she said. "I'm glad you liked it." She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "What's your name?" For a brief second, Obinna almost said his real name, but he caught himself. "My name is Obi," he said. It was close enough to feel natural. She nodded. "I'm Amara." "Amara?" The name felt warm somehow. "Well, it's nice to meet you," he said. "You too." She picked up her grocery bag. "I should go now." "Okay, see you again." Then she walked away down the street. Obinna watched her go until she disappeared around the corner. Something about that short conversation lingered in his mind for the rest of the afternoon. Many customers came and went after that, but none of them left the same impression. That evening, when Chaik arrived to check on him, Obinna was unusually quiet. Chaik noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked. "Did someone insult your cooking?" Obinna shook his head. "No." "Then what?" Obinna leaned against the stall. "I think I met someone interesting today." Chaik raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "Yes." "Tell me." Obinna explained everything, the polite greeting, the conversation, and the way she had bought food for him. Chaik listened carefully. When Obinna finished, Chaik smiled. "So? She showed kindness to a poor roadside food seller?" "Yes, that's exactly what you were hoping to find." Obinna nodded slowly. "But it wasn't just kindness." "What do you mean?" "There was something sincere about her." Chaik crossed his arms. "And her name?" "Amara." Chaik chuckled. "Well, my friend, it seems your experiment might be working faster than expected." Obinna smiled faintly. Maybe. But deep down he knew something important had happened that day. Out of all the hundreds of people who had passed his stall, Only one had stopped to care about him as a person. Only one had asked if he had eaten. Only one had shown kindness without expecting anything in return. A young woman named Amara, and although neither of them realized it yet, that small act of kindness had just changed both of their lives forever. Because the next day, Amara would return to the stall again. The following afternoon, the sun hung high over the busy street, as Obinna stirred a large pot of beans at his roadside stall. Steam rose into the air, carrying the warm scent of cooked food that drifted across the street and attracted hungry passers-by. It had been one full day since he met the young woman named Amara, yet strangely, he kept thinking about her. He tried to focus on his work, serving customers, collecting money, and refilling plates, but his mind wandered back to the same moment again and again. The way she had greeted him politely, the way she noticed he hadn't eaten, the way she had quietly bought food for him without making a big deal about it. It was such a small gesture, but to Obinna it had meant everything. In the world he came from, kindness was often complicated. People were polite because they wanted something. They smiled because they expected favors. Every interaction seemed to carry hidden intentions, but Amara's kindness had been simple and natural, and that simplicity stayed with him. The day moved slowly. Several regular customers stopped by the stall for lunch, including the two mechanics who had been his first customers. Obi, one of them called as he approached. "That rice you made yesterday was good, thank you." Obinna replied with a smile. "Serve us 2 plates again." As he prepared the food, he glanced occasionally down the street without realizing he was doing it. He wasn't even sure why. Or maybe he was. But hours passed and there was no sign of Amara. By late afternoon, the heat softened slightly as the sun began drifting toward the horizon. Workers started leaving nearby shops and offices, and the street became lively again. Obinna wiped sweat from his forehead with a small towel and leaned briefly against the stall. Just then, he saw a familiar figure walking slowly down the street. It was her, Amara. She wore a simple light blue dress and carried the same grocery bag he had seen the day before. Her hair was tied neatly behind her head, and her calm expression made her easy to recognize even from a distance. For some reason, Obinna suddenly felt nervous. He quickly stood upright and pretended to focus on arranging plates. When she reached the stall, she smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, Obi." The sound of his name in her voice made him smile. "Good afternoon, Amara. Are you busy?" "Not right now. That's good." She glanced at the food. "I hope you still have rice and beans." "I do." "Then give me 1 plate, please." Obinna served her food carefully and handed her the plate. She paid and sat down on the same wooden bench as the day before. But this time something was different. After taking a few bites, she spoke again. "So, how long have you been selling food here?" Obinna paused slightly before answering. "Not very long." "Oh, I'm still new." "That explains it," she said thoughtfully. "Explains what?" "I pass through the street almost every day, but I only noticed this stall recently." Obinna nodded. "Yes, I started recently." Amara continued eating quietly for a moment, then she looked up again. "Is it difficult?" "What?" "This work." Obinna thought carefully. "It can be tiring," he admitted, "but it's honest work." She smiled slightly. "That's true." A comfortable silence settled between them as she finished her meal. When she was done, she returned the empty plate. "Your cooking is really good," she said. "I'm glad you like it." "I do." She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Do you mind if I sit here for a little while?" Obinna blinked in surprise. "Of course not. I'm just waiting for the heat to go down a bit before walking home. You're welcome to stay." Amara returned to the bench and sat comfortably. For the next few minutes, Obinna continued serving customers while she watched the street quietly. Eventually, the crowd faded again. When the stall became quiet, Amara spoke. "So, what made you start this business?" The question made Obinna pause. He couldn't exactly tell her the truth. "Well," he said slowly, "I wanted something simple." "Simple?" "Yes." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. You understand?" "Of course." "How?" Amara smiled faintly. "My life is simple too." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I work at a small tailoring shop nearby." "You're a tailor?" "Not exactly," she said with a small laugh. "I'm still learning. But one day, I want to open my own fashion shop." Her eyes brightened slightly when she said that. Obinna noticed immediately. "You sound passionate about it." I am. Why fashion? Amara looked down at her hands thoughtfully. Because clothes can make people feel confident. That's true. And I like creating things with my hands. She smiled. It makes me happy. Obinna listened carefully. He found himself enjoying the conversation more than he expected. No one here knew he owned companies or buildings. There were no expectations. Just two people talking. What about you? Amara asked. What about me? What are your dreams? The question caught him off guard. For a moment he didn't know how to answer. As a billionaire, his goals were usually business expansions or investment plans. But here in this moment, that didn't feel like the right answer. I guess, he said slowly. I want peace. Peace? Yes. Amara nodded thoughtfully. That's a good dream. They both laughed softly. The conversation continued naturally. They talked about the busy street, about the different people who passed by every day, about the small struggles of running a business or learning a trade. For the first time in a long while, Obinna felt relaxed, truly relaxed. There was no pressure to impress anyone. Amara wasn't trying to figure out how rich he was. She wasn't asking about cars or houses or bank accounts. She was simply talking to him. As the sky slowly turned orange with the setting sun, Amara finally stood up. I should go home now. Okay. She picked up her bag. Thank you for letting me sit here. You're always welcome. She smiled again. Maybe I'll stop by tomorrow. I'd like that. Then she began walking away. But after a few steps, she turned back. Oh, and Obi? Yes. Don't forget to eat today. Obinna laughed. I won't. She waved slightly and continued down the street. He watched her until she disappeared around the corner again. Later that evening, when Chaik arrived as usual, he immediately noticed the smile on Obinna's face. You look happy, Chaik said. Obinna shrugged. Maybe. Let me guess. What? The girl came back. Obinna nodded. Yes. And? She stayed and talked with me. Chaik grinned. Ah, the story is beginning. Obinna leaned against the stall. We talked about her dream of opening a fashion shop. Interesting. She's hardworking. Chaik studied him carefully. You like her? Obinna didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said quietly. Yes. Chaik chuckled. Careful, my friend. Why? You might actually fall in love with this girl. Obinna looked down the street where Amara had walked earlier. Something about the thought didn't scare him. In fact, felt strangely right, because for the first time in years, someone had entered his life without knowing anything about his wealth, and that made every moment with her feel real. Neither of them knew it yet, but their simple conversations beside a small, roadside food stall were slowly building something powerful, something neither money nor status could create, friendship, and maybe something even deeper. Days slowly turned into weeks, and the roadside food stall became a place that meant more to Obinna than he had ever expected. At first, it had simply been part of his experiment, a disguise to help him understand people and find someone who could see beyond wealth. But now, something had changed. Every afternoon, without fail, Amara passed by the stall. Sometimes she came straight from the tailoring shop where she worked, her fingers still slightly marked with chalk from measuring fabrics. Other times, she carried groceries from the market. But, no matter how busy the street was, she always stopped. And somehow, those small moments became the most important part of Obinna's day. At first, their conversations had been simple. How was your day? Did the shop have many customers? Is business going well today? But, as the days passed, the conversations grew longer and deeper. Amara began sitting at the small wooden bench near the stall almost every evening while the heat of the day faded and the golden sunset painted the sky above the street. Sometimes, Obinna served customers while they talked. Sometimes, the stall was quiet, and they simply shared stories. Amara spoke about her childhood growing up in a small village with her parents and her older sister, Adiza. We didn't have much money, she said one evening while gently stirring the food on her plate, but my mother always made sure we were happy. What kind of work did your parents do? Obinna asked. My father was a farmer, she replied, and my mother sold vegetables in the market. Obinna nodded quietly. Her story reminded him of his own upbringing. My parents worked very hard too, he said. Really? Yes. They taught me that hard work is the only way to build something meaningful. Amara smiled softly. I believe that too. Another evening, the conversation drifted toward dreams. Amara's eyes brightened whenever she spoke about fashion. One day, she said excitedly, I want to open my own tailoring shop. Obinna leaned slightly forward as he listened. What kind of shop? A place where people can come for beautiful clothes, she said, her hands moving as she described it. I want to design dresses that make women feel confident. What kind of dresses? She laughed. All kinds. Wedding dresses, party dresses, elegant outfits. Her voice softened slightly. I want people to feel special when they wear something I created. Obinna watched her carefully. The passion in her voice was unmistakable. That sounds like a wonderful dream, he said sincerely. Amara smiled shyly. But it will take time. Why? I need to save money first. How much? A lot, she admitted with a small sigh. But I will get there someday. Obinna admired her determination. In his world, people solved problems with money, but Amara believed in patience and effort. That difference fascinated him. Slowly, their friendship deepened. Soon, they began joking with each other. Amara teased him about his cooking. You always add too much stew, she said one evening. Customers like stew. Yes, she replied playfully, but sometimes I think you do it just for me. Obinna laughed. Maybe. Another time, she caught him staring at the street while stirring a pot. What are you thinking about? She asked. Nothing. You're lying. How do you know? Because you make that face when you're thinking too much. What face? That serious one. They both laughed. These simple moments filled Obinna with a happiness he hadn't felt in years. But deep inside, something else was growing. Something stronger than friendship. One evening, after closing the stall earlier than usual, Obinna found himself sitting beside Amara on the wooden bench. The street was quieter than usual. The sunset had painted the sky with shades of orange and pink. A gentle breeze moved through the air, carrying the scent of cooking food from nearby stalls. Amara looked peaceful as she watched the fading sunlight. This is my favorite time of day, she said softly. Why? Because everything slows down. Obinna nodded. I like it too. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Amara spoke again. You know, when I first saw you here, I thought you looked very serious. Serious? Yes. She smiled slightly, like someone carrying a lot of worries. Obinna chuckled. Maybe I was. And now? Now I feel lighter. Amara looked at him curiously. Why? Obinna hesitated, then he answered honestly. Because of you. Amara blinked in surprise. Me? Yes. How? You remind me that life can be simple. She laughed softly. My life is not that simple. It seems simple compared to mine. Why? Obinna looked down at his hands. It's hard to explain. Amara studied him carefully. You know, she said gently, sometimes I feel like you're hiding something. Obinna felt his heart skip a beat. Hiding something? Yes. What do you mean? I don't know exactly, she said. But sometimes when you talk, it feels like there's a bigger story behind your words. Obinna forced a small smile. Maybe I just think too much. Maybe, she said, but she didn't push the question further. The sky slowly darkened. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Amara stood up and brushed dust from her dress. I should go home. Obinna nodded. Okay. But before she could leave, a sudden rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Both of them looked up. Dark clouds had gathered quickly. Within seconds, the first drops of rain began to fall. Then the rain became heavy. Amara laughed and ran under the small umbrella covering the food stall. Well, she said breathlessly, I guess I'm not going anywhere yet. Obinna laughed too. The rain poured down loudly, bouncing off the metal roof of the stall. Water splashed onto the street as people ran for shelter. Soon the street was nearly empty. Only the two of them remained under the small shelter. The sound of rain surrounded them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They stood close together to avoid getting wet. Obinna could feel his heart beating faster. Amara looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. You know something? She said quietly. What? I'm glad I stopped at your stall that day. Obinna smiled. So am I. If I hadn't. She paused. We might never have met. That would have been unfortunate, he said softly. Their eyes met. The world outside the small stall seemed to disappear. Obinna felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he could no longer ignore. "Amara," he said quietly. "Yes. I need to tell you something." She looked curious. "What is it?" He took a slow breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. For a moment, Amara didn't move. Her eyes widened slightly. The rain continued pouring outside. Obinna suddenly worried he had said too much, but then Amara smiled softly. Her cheeks turned slightly pink. "I was wondering when you would say that." Obinna blinked in surprise. "You knew? I had a feeling." "And how do you feel?" Amara looked down shyly for a moment. Then she met his eyes again. "I think," she said quietly, "I already fell in love with you." Obinna felt warmth rush through his chest. For the first time in years, his heart felt completely full. Outside, the rain slowly began to fade, but neither of them moved. They simply stood there, smiling at each other. In that small roadside stall, under the soft glow of streetlights and the fading sound of rain, something beautiful had just begun. A love built not on wealth, not on status, but on kindness, honesty, and two hearts finding each other in the most unexpected place. For several weeks after the rainy evening when Obinna and Amara confessed their feelings, life seemed almost perfect. Every day felt lighter. Obinna woke up each morning with excitement, knowing that before the day ended, he would see Amara again. The roadside food stall that had once been part of an experiment now felt like a place filled with meaning. It had become the center of something far more valuable than any business deal he had ever made. Love. Amara's visits became the most important moments of his day. Sometimes she came early in the afternoon during her break from the tailoring shop. Other times she arrived in the evening when the heat of the day had softened and the sky glowed with the colors of sunset. Whenever she appeared on the street, Obinna always noticed immediately, even from far away. She walked with the same calm confidence he had admired the first day he met her. She rarely rushed, even when the street was busy and noisy. And when she smiled at him, it felt like the entire street became brighter. But love rarely grows without obstacles, and the first obstacle appeared in the form of someone very protective of Amara, her older sister, Edize. One evening, Amara sat beside Obinna on the small wooden bench near the stall while the last few customers finished their meals. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze carried the smell of fried plantain through the street. Amara seemed unusually quiet. Obinna noticed immediately. "You're thinking about something," he said. Amara looked at him with mild surprise. "How do you always know?" "You get that look on your face," he replied. "What look?" "The one where your eyebrows come together like you're solving a difficult problem." Amara laughed softly. "Maybe I am. You want to talk about it?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's about my sister." "Your sister?" "Yes, Edize." Obinna nodded slowly. "You've mentioned her before." Amara sighed slightly. "She's very protective of me." "That sounds like a good thing." "It is," Amara said. "But sometimes she worries too much." "What is she worried about now?" Amara looked down at her hands. "She knows about you." Obinna felt a small knot form in his chest. "And?" "She doesn't like the idea of us being together." Obinna had expected something like this eventually. Still, hearing it out loud felt uncomfortable. "Why not?" he asked gently. Amara shrugged. "She thinks I deserve someone who can give me a better life." "A better life?" he repeated quietly. "She worries about money," Amara admitted. "You know how things are." Obinna nodded slowly. Of course he knew. From Edize's perspective, Amara was dating a roadside food seller with no obvious future. Probably looked like a risky decision. "What did you tell her?" he asked. Amara lifted her head and looked directly at him. "I told her I care about you." Obinna felt a small warmth in his chest. "And?" She didn't seem convinced. "What exactly did she say?" Amara sighed again. "She said I shouldn't waste my life with someone who cannot provide stability." The words stung slightly, even though Obinna knew they came from someone who didn't know the truth. "Does that bother you?" he asked. Amara shook her head firmly. "No. Are you sure?" "Yes." She looked serious now. "I don't care about money the way my sister does." "What do you care about?" Amara smiled softly. "Kindness." She looked around the stall. "You work hard. You treat people well. You're honest." Her voice grew gentle. "That matters more to me than money." Obinna felt deeply moved by her words. But at the same time, A small sense of guilt crept into his mind. Because the truth was, he was exactly the kind of man Adesua would approve of. In fact, he was far wealthier than anyone she could imagine. Yet he was hiding that truth. The thought troubled him briefly, but he pushed it aside. He would tell Amara eventually. Just not yet. I'm sorry your sister feels that way, he said quietly. Amara shrugged. She'll get used to it, but life had a way of testing that hope. 2 days later, the problem became very real. One of them was Amara. The other was a taller woman with a confident posture and sharp eyes. Even before Amara introduced them, Obinna knew who it was, Adesua. As they approached, Amara smiled warmly. Good afternoon, Obi. Good afternoon, Amara. Then she turned slightly toward the other woman. This is my sister, Adesua. Adesua looked at him carefully. Her eyes moved from his worn sandals to his torn singlet and the small food stall behind him. Her expression revealed very little emotion. Good afternoon, she said politely. Good afternoon, Obinna replied. There was a brief silence. Then Adesua spoke again. So, you are the one my sister has been talking about. Obinna nodded. Yes. Adesua crossed her arms slightly. You sell food here? Yes. How long have you been doing this? Not very long. She glanced around the stall again. Is this your only job? The question sounded more like an investigation than casual conversation. Amara noticed immediately. Adesua, she said gently. You don't need to interrogate him. I'm not interrogating anyone, Adesua replied calmly. I'm just asking questions. She turned back to Obinna. Do you have plans to expand your business? Obinna answered politely. I'm still building things step by step. Adesua nodded slowly, though her expression remained skeptical. I see. Amara shifted uncomfortably. Adesua, but Adesua wasn't finished. You seem like a hardworking man, she said, but my sister deserves stability. The words hung in the air. Customers nearby pretended not to listen, though some clearly were. Obinna kept his voice calm. I understand your concern. Adesua studied him carefully. Do you? Yes. Amara looked embarrassed. Adesua, please. But Adesua continued. I'm not trying to be rude, she said. I just want the best for my sister. That's understandable, Obinna replied. Amara suddenly spoke more firmly. And I want the best for myself. Adesua turned toward her. Amara. I'm happy, Amara said clearly. Her voice carried quiet determination. Obi treats me well. He respects me. That's what matters. Adesua stared at her sister for a moment. Then she sighed. I hope you're right. With that, she turned and began walking away. Amara hesitated, then looked back at Obinna. I'm sorry about that. It's okay, he said gently. She's just looking out for you. Amara nodded. Yes, but she doesn't understand everything yet. Obinna smiled slightly. Maybe one day she will. Amara smiled back. Then she hurried after her sister. As they walked away down the street, Obinna watched them disappear into the crowd. For the first time since starting this experiment, he felt the true weight of the lie he was living, because the more Amara defended him, the more painful the truth might become when she finally discovered it. And somewhere deep inside, Obinna knew that moment was coming sooner or later. What he didn't know was that Adesua was not finished asking questions. In fact, her curiosity about this poor roadside food seller was only just beginning. After Adesua's first visit to the roadside food stall, something about the encounter refused to leave her mind. She had gone there expecting to confirm what she already believed, that her younger sister was making a terrible mistake. But instead of feeling satisfied after meeting Obinna, she felt unsettled. There had been something about him that didn't quite match the picture she had imagined. Yes, he wore poor clothes. Yes, he worked at a roadside food stall. Yes, everything about his appearance suggested a man struggling to make a living, but there was something else, something difficult to explain. It was the way he spoke, the calm confidence in his voice, the way he carried himself, even the way he looked directly into her eyes when answering questions. Adiz had met many men in her life. She could usually tell immediately what kind of person someone was, but Obinna confused her. He doesn't behave like a struggling man, she muttered to herself later that night. Amara looked up from the small table where she was folding clothes. What do you mean? Adize sat down across from her. That food seller you're dating? Obi. Amara corrected gently. Yes, Obi. Adize said. There's something strange about him. Amara frowned slightly. Strange how? Adize thought carefully. I don't know exactly, but something about him feels different. Amara laughed softly. You're overthinking things. Maybe. But Adize didn't look convinced. People who struggle usually show it in their behavior, she continued. They speak differently. They act differently. And Obi doesn't? No. Amara shrugged. Maybe he's just confident. Maybe. Adize replied, but deep down she wasn't satisfied with that explanation. The next few days passed normally for Amara. She continued visiting Obinna's stall every afternoon. Their conversations were still warm and easy, but Adize had quietly begun paying closer attention. She asked small questions whenever Amara mentioned him. What time does he usually close his stall? Does he live nearby? Does he have family in the city? Amara answered casually, not realizing her sister was slowly collecting information. Finally, one afternoon Adize made a decision. If I want to understand this man, she thought, I need to observe him myself. That evening, as the sun began setting, Adize quietly walked toward the street where the food stall stood, but this time she didn't approach it. Instead, she stayed across the road near a small shop pretending to browse items while secretly watching. From where she stood, she could see Obinna clearly. He moved around the stall calmly, serving customers and stirring the large pot of food. Everything about him looked ordinary, completely normal, yet Adesua remained patient. If he's hiding something, she thought, I'll see it. The evening crowd slowly came and went. Workers bought dinner before going home. Taxi drivers stopped briefly for food. Eventually, the sky grew darker and the street became quieter. Around that time, Amara arrived as usual. Adesua watched carefully as the two of them talked and laughed beside the stall. The sight made her sigh. Amara really likes him, she thought. For a moment, Adesua almost felt guilty for spying, but her protective instincts were stronger. I just want to be sure, she told herself. After a while, Amara said goodbye and walked home. Adesua followed at a distance, making sure her sister didn't notice her presence. Once Amara entered their house safely, Adesua quietly turned around and returned to the street. The food stall was nearly empty now. Obinna stood alone, cleaning plates and packing up the remaining food. Adesua remained hidden near the shop across the road. Let's see what happens next, she whispered to herself. A few minutes passed. Then, something unexpected happened. A sleek black luxury car slowly drove down the street. Even in the dim light, Adesua could immediately tell the vehicle was expensive, very expensive. Cars like that didn't usually appear in this neighborhood. The vehicle stopped right beside the food stall. Adesua's eyes narrowed. What is this? She murmured. The driver stepped out quickly and walked toward Obinna. Then something happened that made Adesua freeze completely. The driver greeted him respectfully. Good evening, sir. Sir? Adesua leaned forward slightly, her heart beginning to race. She watched as Obinna removed his faded cap. Then he reached behind the stall and pulled out a small bag. Inside were different clothes, clean clothes. Within minutes, he had changed. The torn singlet disappeared. The worn sandals disappeared. Standing there now was a completely different man, a man who looked confident, polished, and powerful. The driver opened the car door. Obinna stepped inside the luxury vehicle. Before entering, he said calmly, "Let's go." The car drove away smoothly. Adesua stood frozen on the sidewalk. Her mind struggled to process what she had just witnessed. That can't be right. Her heart pounded as she quickly pulled out her phone. She opened her internet browser. If that man is who I think he might be. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed, Obinna Okoro, Lagos businessman. Within seconds, dozens of news articles appeared. Pictures filled the screen. Adesua's eyes widened. The man in the photos was the same man she had just seen remove his disguise. Same face, same eyes, same confident posture. The headline of one article read, Young billionaire Obinna Okoro expands business empire across Africa. Adesua gasped. No way. She scrolled through more articles. Each one confirmed the same truth. Obinna Okoro, technology investor, real estate magnate, multi-millionaire, possibly even a billionaire. Adesua's mouth slowly fell open. That roadside food seller is one of the richest men in the country? Her heart began racing with excitement. She suddenly remembered every conversation she had with Amara about him. Her sister had been worried about money, about stability, about the future, but now, everything had changed. Adeze quickly began walking home, her mind spinning with thoughts. When she entered the house, she found Amara sitting at the small table, reading a fashion magazine. Amara looked up. "You're back early." Adeze didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed her phone on the table and leaned forward. "Amara," she said breathlessly. "Yes, you need to see this." Amara frowned slightly. "What is it?" Adeze turned the phone screen toward her. Amara glanced down casually, then her eyes widened. The screen displayed a photograph of Obinna in an expensive suit standing beside a tall building during a business event. The headline beneath the image read, "Young billionaire Obinna Okoro named one of Africa's most powerful entrepreneurs." Amara stared at the screen. Her heart suddenly began beating faster. "What is this?" Adeze smiled widely. "That food seller you've been dating," she pointed excitedly at the picture, "is him." Amara looked back and forth between the article and her sister. "That's not possible." "Oh, it is possible," Adeze said. "I saw him tonight." Amara's voice trembled slightly. "What do you mean you saw him?" "I followed him." "You what?" Adeze ignored the question. "I watched him close his stall, and then a luxury car came to pick him up." Amara's heart sank. "And he changed clothes right there. He's been pretending." Adeze leaned back with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations, little sister." Amara looked confused. "For what?" Adeze grinned. "You didn't just find a boyfriend." She tapped the phone screen again. "You hit the jackpot." The small room fell into a heavy silence after Adeze placed the phone on the table. Amara stared at the glowing screen as if it might suddenly change. The photograph displayed a man wearing an expensive dark suit standing confidently in front of a tall glass building while reporters surrounded him. The man's face was calm, composed, and powerful. But what unsettled Amara the most was how familiar that face was. The eyes, the smile, the shape of his face. It was him, Obi, or at least the man she believed was Obi. Her heart began beating faster. "This can't be right," she whispered. Adeze crossed her arms with a confident smile. "Oh, it's right." Amara shook her head slowly. "No. You think I don't know what I saw?" Adeze replied. "I watched him with my own eyes tonight." Amara finally looked up at her sister. "You followed him?" "Yes." "Why would you do that?" Adeze shrugged. "Because something about him didn't make sense." Amara stood up from the chair, pacing slowly across the small room. Her mind felt overwhelmed. The simple roadside food seller she had grown to love suddenly appeared to be someone completely different. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. Adeze leaned against the table and began explaining everything. "I went back to the street after you left the stall," she said. "I stayed across the road where he couldn't see me." Amara listened silently, her chest tightening. "I watched him close the stall like usual." Adeze continued. "Then a luxury car drove up." "What kind of car?" Amara asked quietly. "One of those cars rich businessmen use." Amara's stomach twisted. "And then?" Adeze smiled slightly. The driver stepped out and greeted him. "What did he say?" He said, "Good evening, sir." Amara's heart skipped. "Sir?" "Then your Obi removed that dirty cap and pulled out clean clothes from behind the stall. He changed right there." Amara stared at her sister. "And after that?" "He got into the car like someone who owned it." The words echoed in Amara's mind. Her throat felt dry. "Show me again," she said. Adeze picked up the phone and scrolled through the article. She held the screen toward Amara again. "This is him." Amara looked closely at the picture. Now that she examined it carefully, she could see it clearly. It really was him. The same eyes that looked at her every evening beside the roadside stall, the same gentle smile that had comforted her so many times. But here he looked different. Confident, powerful, wealthy, not a roadside food seller. The article headline beneath the photo read, "Obinna Okoro, the young billionaire changing the face of African business." Amara whispered the name slowly. "Obinna Okoro." Adeze nodded eagerly. "Yes, he's famous. He owns companies, buildings, hotels, everything." Amara sat down slowly. Her thoughts felt tangled. "But why?" Adeze frowned. "Why what? Why would someone like that pretend to sell food on the roadside?" Adeze shrugged. Who knows? Maybe he was bored. Maybe it was some kind of experiment. Amara shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Adisa suddenly laughed. What doesn't make sense? This. She pointed at the phone again. Amara, do you realize what this means? Amara looked confused. What do you mean? Addis leaned forward excitedly. This means you are dating one of the richest men in the country. Amara remained silent, but Addis's excitement grew. You were worried about money. You were worried about your future. Well, guess what? She tapped the table with her finger. You don't have to worry anymore. Amara looked at her sister carefully. Addis, yes. That's not the point. Addis blinked in disbelief. Not the point? No. Amara's voice became quieter. The point is that he lied to me. Addis waved her hand dismissively. Oh, please. That's not a big problem. Amara stared at her. It's not? No. Addis shook her head. Men lie sometimes. But this is different. How? He pretended to be poor. Addis rolled her eyes slightly. And so what? So what? Amara repeated. Yes. Addis leaned closer. If anything, this is good news. How? You just discovered that your boyfriend is extremely rich. She laughed excitedly. Do you know how lucky you are? Amara remained quiet. But Addis continued speaking enthusiastically. Think about it. You could live in a big house. You could travel anywhere. You could open 10 fashion shops instead of one. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. This is your opportunity. Amara slowly shook her head. You're not listening. Addis frowned. What do you mean? I don't care about his money. Addis stared at her like she had said something ridiculous. You don't care. No. Amara. Adiez placed both hands on the table. Listen carefully. You thought you were dating a poor man. Yes. But he is actually rich. Yes. Adiez spread her arms dramatically. So what exactly is the problem here? Amara looked down at the floor. The problem is trust. Adiez sighed loudly. You're overthinking things. No. Yes, you are. Adiez sat down opposite her sister. Let me explain something. She leaned forward. Men like that do not come into the lives of ordinary girls. What do you mean? I mean, billionaires don't walk around falling in love with roadside tailors. Her tone became serious. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Amara's voice became firm. I don't want an opportunity. I want honesty. Adiez groaned. You're being dramatic. Am I? Yes. She crossed her arms. If he's rich and he loves you, that's all that matters. Amara looked up slowly. But why didn't he trust me enough to tell the truth? Adiez didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shrugged. Maybe he wanted to test you. Test me? Yes. To see if you loved him for money. Amara thought about that. The idea made her stomach tighten. A test? Adiez nodded. Exactly. And guess what? What? You passed. She smiled proudly. You loved him even when you thought he was poor. Amara remained quiet, but her heart felt heavy. The situation was far more complicated than Adiez seemed to understand. For weeks, she had believed she was building a relationship based on honesty and simplicity. Now she discovered that the foundation of that relationship had been a lie. Adiz suddenly stood up again. Well, there's only one thing left to do. Amara looked at her. What? You go see him tomorrow? And? Adiz smiled confidently. You tell him you know the truth. Amara's chest tightened. And then? Adiz grinned widely. Then you celebrate. Amara stared at her. Celebrate? Yes. Adiz lifted the phone again and pointed at the picture. Because my dear sister, she laughed excitedly. You didn't just fall in love. You hit the jackpot. But Amara didn't smile. Instead, she looked down at the picture again. The face of the man she loved stared back at her from the screen, but now, instead of warmth, her heart felt filled with confusion. And one question echoed loudly in her mind. Why? Why had he pretended to be someone else? The only way to find the answer was to confront him, and tomorrow, she would. Amara barely slept that night. She lay awake on her small bed, staring at the ceiling as the quiet sounds of the night drifted through the window. Every time she closed her eyes, the same images replayed in her mind. Obi standing behind the roadside stall, smiling warmly as he served food. Obi laughing with her on the small wooden bench. Obi standing under the rain that evening when they confessed their love. And then the other image, the one she had seen on Adiza's phone. The same man wearing a tailored suit, standing confidently beside towering buildings while reporters took photographs. Obinna Okoro, a billionaire, powerful businessman, a man who had been pretending to be someone else. Her chest tightened every time she thought about it. The more she tried to understand it, the more confused she felt. Why would he lie to me? She whispered quietly to herself. Part of her wanted to believe there was a good explanation, but another part of her felt deeply hurt because everything between them had felt so real. Their conversations, their laughter, their shared dreams, had all of that been real? Or had she simply been part of some strange game? When the first rays of morning sunlight slipped through the window, Amara was already awake. She sat up slowly and rubbed her tired eyes. Across the room, Adiz was already preparing for the day. Her sister glanced at her. "You look terrible," Adiz said. "I didn't sleep much." "That's understandable," Adiz replied casually. "If I discovered I was dating a billionaire, I wouldn't sleep either." Amara didn't smile. "This isn't funny," Adiz shrugged. "I'm not joking." Amara stood up and began getting ready. She washed her face slowly, her thoughts still tangled. Finally, Adiz asked the question she had been waiting for. "So, what are you going to do?" Amara took a deep breath. "I'm going to talk to him." Adiz nodded approvingly. "Good, but not to celebrate," Amara added. Adiz sighed. "Amara, I need answers." "Well," Adiz said, "you'll probably get them." She smiled again. "And hopefully a diamond ring too." Amara shook her head slightly and walked out of the room. The afternoon sun hung brightly over the busy street as Amara approached the roadside stall. Her heart beat faster with every step. From a distance, everything looked the same as it always did. The familiar umbrella shading the stall, the large pot of food steaming gently, customers standing nearby waiting for their meals. And behind the stall, Obi, or rather Obinna. He was stirring the pot calmly, exactly as he had done every day since she met him. For a brief moment, Amara felt a painful wave of sadness. He looked so normal, so familiar. If she hadn't seen the truth with her own eyes, she might never have suspected anything. But now she knew, and everything felt different. Obinna noticed her approaching. His face brightened instantly. "Amara." He wiped his hands quickly on a small towel. "Good afternoon." His smile was warm, genuine, exactly the same as always. But Amara didn't smile back. She walked up to the stall slowly. "Good afternoon," she said quietly. Obinna immediately sensed something was wrong. Her voice sounded distant, cold. "Are you okay?" he asked. Amara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked around the stall, at the pot, at the plates, at the simple wooden bench where they had spent so many evenings talking. Finally, she looked directly at him. "Who are you?" The question stunned him. "What?" Amara's voice became firmer. "Who are you really?" Obinna's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, he didn't move. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Amara reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She opened the article Adeze had shown her. Then she turned the screen toward him. The photograph of the billionaire businessman filled the screen. The headline beneath it read clearly, "Obinna Okoro, young billionaire entrepreneur." Obinna felt the blood drain from his face. The moment he had been quietly fearing had finally arrived. Amara's voice trembled slightly. "Is this you?" Silence hung between them. Obinna looked at the screen, then back at Amara. He knew there was no point denying it. "Yes," he said quietly. Amara's chest tightened. "You lied to me. Amara, you lied." Her voice rose slightly. "You pretended to be someone else." Customers nearby began glancing toward them curiously. Obinna lowered his voice. "Please, let's talk somewhere quieter." "No." Amara shook her head. "We can talk right here." Her eyes burned with emotion. "Why did you do this?" Obinna took a slow breath. "I wanted to find someone who would love me for who I am." Amara stared at him. "So, you decided to pretend to be poor?" "Yes. You think that's normal?" "I know it sounds strange." "Strange?" she interrupted. "You made me believe you were struggling to survive. I never meant to hurt you. But you did." Her voice cracked slightly. "You made me trust you." Obinna's heart ached hearing the pain in her voice. "I was going to tell you," he said softly. "When?" "Soon." "How soon?" Obinna hesitated. "I don't know." Amara shook her head in disbelief. So, this was a test? No. Yes, it was. She stepped back slightly. You wanted to see if I would love you when I thought you were poor. That wasn't the only reason. Then what was it? Obinna's voice softened. Because I was tired of people loving my money instead of me. Amara's expression hardened. So, you decided to lie to someone who actually loved you? I didn't lie about my feelings, but you lied about everything else. Tears formed in her eyes. Do you know how humiliating this feels? Obinna stepped closer. Amara, please. Don't. She raised her hand slightly. Don't come closer. Her heart felt like it was breaking. I defended you to my sister, she said quietly. I told her you were honest. I told her you were hardworking. I believed every word you said. Obinna felt deep regret flooding through him. Everything I felt for you was real. But how can I believe anything you say now? Her voice trembled. You're a billionaire pretending to sell rice on the roadside. How am I supposed to trust you? Obinna struggled to find the right words. I just wanted to know that someone could love me without my wealth. Amara wiped a tear from her cheek. Well, congratulations. What do you mean? You found that person. Her voice softened slightly. But then you ruined it. The words cut deeply. Amara, please. She shook her head again. I can't do this. Please listen to me. No. Her voice became quiet but firm. I need time. Obinna felt panic rising. Don't walk away. But Amara was already stepping backward. I trusted you, she said softly, and you made me feel like a fool. That was never my intention, but it happened. She turned away slowly. Obinna watched helplessly. Amara. She stopped briefly but didn't turn around. I loved the man I thought you were, she said quietly. Then she continued walking down the street. Obinna stood frozen behind the stall as she disappeared into the crowd. For the first time since beginning the strange journey, he realized something terrifying. In trying to find true love, he might have just destroyed it. The street felt strangely empty after Amara walked away. Even though people still passed by and cars still drove along the road, everything seemed quieter to Obinna. He stood behind the roadside stall without moving. Her final words echoed again and again in his mind. I loved the man I thought you were. The sentence felt like a knife twisting slowly in his chest. For weeks, this small roadside stall had been filled with laughter and conversation. It had become a place where his heart felt alive, but now it felt cold, silent, broken. One of the mechanics who often bought food approached the stall. Obinna, give me. The man stopped mid-sentence when he saw Obinna's expression. You okay? Obinna forced a small nod. Yes. The mechanic said suspiciously. You look like someone who just lost something important. Obinna didn't answer. He simply served the food quietly. The mechanic paid and walked away slowly, still glancing back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Customers came. Customers left. But Obinna barely noticed them. His mind replayed the confrontation over and over again. The hurt in Amara's eyes, the disappointment in her voice, the tears she tried to hide. Each memory filled him with regret. Eventually, the sky darkened and the street began to quiet down. For the first time since he started the experiment, Obinna closed the stall early. He packed away the plates slowly, his movements heavy with exhaustion. When the familiar black luxury car arrived beside the stall, his driver stepped out as usual. Good evening, sir. But this time, Obinna didn't respond. He simply removed the faded cap and placed it on the stall table. The driver noticed immediately. Is everything all right? Obinna didn't answer. Instead, he quietly changed into his regular clothes. When he finally sat inside the car, he leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. Sir, you look troubled. Obinna spoke after a long silence. I think I made a terrible mistake. That night, the large house that usually felt peaceful now felt unbearably empty. Obinna walked slowly through the spacious living room. The expensive furniture, the tall windows, the polished floors, everything looked impressive, yet none of it brought him comfort. For the first time in years, his wealth felt completely meaningless. He loosened his tie and sat down heavily on the couch. After a few minutes, his phone rang. It was Chaik. Obinna answered reluctantly. Hello. Finally, Chaik said. I've been calling you. I know. What happened today? Obinna sighed deeply. She found out. Chaik paused. Found out what? The truth. Oh. Silence followed. Then Chaik spoke again. And? She left. Another pause. You told her everything? Yes. And she didn't understand? Obinna leaned forward, rubbing his forehead. She thinks I was playing games with her. Chaik sighed. Well, can you blame her? Obinna closed his eyes. No. You did lie to her. I know. And you pretended to be poor. I know. And now she feels like she was part of some experiment. Obinna's voice sounded tired. I never meant it that way. I believe you, Chaik replied, but from her perspective, it probably hurts. Obinna leaned back again. I've built companies worth millions, he said quietly. I've negotiated deals with powerful people, but right now, I feel completely helpless. Chaik's voice softened. So, what are you going to do? Obinna didn't hesitate. I'm not giving up. Good. I love her. Then go fight for her. Obinna looked toward the window. Outside, the city lights glowed against the dark sky. I just hope it's not too late. The next morning felt heavy for both of them. Amara woke up with swollen eyes. She had cried quietly through most of the night. Across the room, Adiz noticed immediately. You look worse than yesterday, she said. Amara sat silently on the edge of the bed. So, you talked to him? Adiz asked. Yes. And? Amara's voice sounded tired. He admitted everything. Adiz smiled slightly. Of course he did. Amara looked up at her. He lied to me, Adiz. Adiz shrugged. Technically, yes. He didn't lie about loving you. Amara sighed. That doesn't change the fact that he deceived me. Adiz walked over and sat beside her. Let me ask you something. What? Do you still love him? Amara hesitated. Her heart already knew the answer, but the pain made it difficult to say. Yes, she whispered. Adiz nodded. I thought so. But I don't know if I can trust him again. Adiz folded her arms thoughtfully. Well, that's something you'll have to decide. Amara stared at the floor. Part of her wanted to forget everything and move on, but another part of her still remembered the man who laughed with her under the rain, the man who listened to her dreams, the man who shared simple meals beside the roadside stall. Those memories didn't feel fake. They felt real, and that made the situation even harder. Meanwhile, across the city, Obinna was already making a decision. Instead of going to his office that morning, he drove back to the street where the food stall stood. The stall looked exactly the same as the day before. The wooden table, the cooking pot, the small umbrella, but without Amara, the place felt empty. Obinna stood there quietly. A few people passing by looked surprised to see the stall closed so early. One of the regular customers approached. Obi, you're not cooking today? Obinna shook his head. Not today. The man shrugged and walked away. Obinna sat down slowly on the small wooden bench, the same bench where he and Amara had spent so many evenings talking. He remembered the first day she sat there, the first time she bought him food, the moment they confessed their feelings in the rain. Every memory filled him with determination. I won't lose her, he whispered. He pulled out his phone and looked at Amara's number. For several seconds he hesitated. Then he placed the phone back in his pocket. No, he said quietly. This conversation needs to happen face to face. He stood up again. For the first time since the confrontation, a small spark of hope returned to his heart, because he knew something important. Amara hadn't said she stopped loving him. She had only said she needed time, and Obinna was willing to fight for as much time as it took. Because this time, he wasn't fighting for money or success or power. He was fighting for something far more valuable, her heart, and he wasn't ready to give up on it. For 3 days after the confrontation, Obinna did not see Amara. Those 3 days felt longer than the past 3 weeks. Every morning he woke up with the same heavy feeling in his chest, hoping that somehow things would fix themselves. But each day passed slowly, and silence between them remained. He still opened the roadside food stall every morning, but everything felt different now. The place that once brought him happiness now reminded him only of what he had lost. Customers still came for food. The mechanics still joked loudly. Taxi drivers still ordered plates of rice and beans, but the one person he kept looking for never appeared. Every time someone walked down the street toward the stall, his heart lifted for a moment, then sank again when he realized it wasn't her. One afternoon, while serving food, one of the regular customers noticed his quiet mood. Obi, the man said while taking his plate. Did you quarrel with that girl? Obinna looked up. What girl? The one who always sits there, the man said, pointing at the wooden bench. She hasn't been around. Obinna forced a small smile. She's just busy. The man nodded thoughtfully. Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice. Whatever happened, you should fix it. Obinna gave a small nod. I'm trying. The man walked away with his food, leaving Obinna standing quietly behind the stall. That evening, after closing the stall early again, Obinna sat on the familiar wooden bench, the same bench where Amara used to sit. The street slowly grew darker as the sun disappeared beyond the buildings. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Obinna stared down the road where she always appeared. But tonight, just like the nights before, she didn't come. He sighed deeply. I can't just wait forever, he muttered. If he truly loved her, he had to do something. He had to fight for her, and he knew exactly where to find her. The next afternoon, Amara sat inside the small tailoring shop where she worked. The shop was quiet. Only the gentle hum of a sewing machine filled the room, but even that sound couldn't distract her thoughts. Her mind kept drifting back to Obinna, or Obi, or whatever she should call him now. For days, she had tried to focus on her work, but every piece of fabric she touched reminded her of the conversations they had shared. Every quiet moment reminded her of the laughter they once enjoyed. She tried to be angry. She tried to convince herself that he had betrayed her trust completely, but no matter how hard she tried, one truth remained. She still loved him. Her thoughts were interrupted when the shop door opened. The small bell above the door rang softly. Amara didn't look up immediately. Welcome, she said automatically, but the silence that followed felt strange. Finally, she lifted her head and froze. Obinna stood at the doorway, not wearing the torn clothes of the roadside food seller, but dressed neatly in simple but clean clothing. Not the expensive suits from the newspaper article, just himself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt heavy with unspoken emotions. The shop owner, an elderly woman working in the back room, glanced toward the front. Amara, is there a customer? Amara swallowed nervously. Yes, someone is here. The woman nodded and returned to her work. Amara slowly stood up. Her heart was beating fast. Why are you here? She asked quietly. Obinna stepped forward slowly. I came to talk to you. Amara crossed her arms slightly. I thought I made it clear that I needed time. I know, he said gently. And I gave you that time. So, why are you here now? Because I can't lose you without trying. Amara looked away for a moment. You already lost me. Obinna shook his head. No, you're just hurt. Amara's voice grew firmer. You lied to me. Yes. You pretended to be someone else. Yes. You made me believe you were poor. Yes. Each answer came without hesitation. Amara looked surprised by his honesty. So, why should I trust anything you say now? Obinna took a deep breath. Because everything I felt for you was real. Amara remained silent. You think I was playing a game, he continued. But I wasn't. His voice grew softer. I was scared. Scared? She repeated. Yes. He looked down briefly before continuing. When people know I'm rich, everything changes. How? They treat me differently. They smile too much. They agree with everything I say, and many of them only want what I can give them. Amara listened quietly. So, I decided to try something different. To hide my wealth. To see if anyone could love me without knowing who I was. Amara's eyes softened slightly. But why me? She asked. I didn't choose you, he replied. You found me. She looked confused. What do you mean? The first day we met, he said. You were the one who stopped at my stall. You were the one who asked if I had eaten. You were the one who bought food for me. Amara remembered that moment clearly. You were kind to me when you thought I was just a poor food seller. His voice grew emotional. That was the first time in years someone treated me like that. Amara felt her chest tighten. I wasn't testing you, he continued. I was just living my life in disguise. And then you came along. He looked directly into her eyes. And I fell in love with you. Tears slowly formed in Amara's eyes. You should have told me, she whispered. I know. Why didn't you? Obinna sighed softly. Because every day I waited, it became harder. I didn't want to lose you." Amara wiped a tear from her cheek. "But you almost did." "I know." He stepped closer, his voice sincere. "But I'm here now, not as a billionaire, not as a roadside food seller, just as a man who loves you." The words hung in the air between them. For a long moment, Amara said nothing. She studied his face carefully. The same eyes that once looked at her from behind the roadside stall now held a mixture of regret, hope, and love. Finally, she spoke. "You really weren't playing with my feelings?" "Never. You truly love me? With all my heart?" Another tear rolled down her cheek. Obinna hesitated before asking the question that mattered most. "Do you still love me?" Amara looked down at the floor, then slowly back up at him. "Yes," she whispered. Relief flooded his chest. "But love alone isn't enough," she added softly. "What do you mean?" "I need honesty. You will have it. No more secrets. None. No more pretending. Never again." Amara searched his face for any sign of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. Finally, a small smile appeared on her lips. "You really made a mess of things," she said. Obinna laughed quietly. "I know, but you're lucky." "Why?" "Because I'm willing to forgive you." Obinna's heart lifted with joy. "Does that mean?" "Yes," she said softly. "We can try again." He smiled warmly. "I promise this time there will be no lies." Amara nodded. "Good." Outside the shop window, the afternoon sun shone brightly over the busy street. Inside the small tailoring shop, two hearts that had nearly broken were slowly finding their way back to each other, because sometimes love isn't about perfection. Sometimes it's about forgiveness, and sometimes the truth of someone's heart is worth fighting for. The weeks following Amara's decision to forgive Obinna felt like the beginning of a brand new chapter in both of their lives. This time, there were no disguises, no lies, no hidden identities. For the first time since they met, everything between them was open and honest. Obinna had kept his promise. The roadside food stall disappeared, not because he was ashamed of it, but because the experiment that started it had finally served its purpose. Yet the memories of that small stall remained important to both of them. It was where they had first met, where they had laughed together, where love had quietly grown between them. Sometimes they still visited the street together in the evenings. The mechanics who once bought rice from Obi the food seller were shocked the first time they saw him step out of a luxury car beside Amara. One of them stared with wide eyes. "Wait, is that not the same Obi that used to sell food here?" Obinna laughed. "Yes, it's me." The man scratched his head in disbelief. "So you were rich all this time?" Obinna nodded. The mechanic shook his head and laughed loudly. "Ah, this life is full of surprises." Amara stood beside him smiling, amused by the reactions. Even though Obinna had returned to his normal life as a businessman, he made sure that nothing about their relationship felt distant or complicated. He still visited Amara often at the tailoring shop. Sometimes he sat quietly in a chair while she worked, watching her carefully measure fabrics and guide the sewing machine. One afternoon, he noticed the way her eyes lit up while she worked on a beautiful dress. "You really love this," he said. Amara smiled. "I do. You look happiest when you're designing something." She placed the fabric aside and looked at him. "It's my dream." "I know. And one day, I'll open my own shop." Obinna nodded thoughtfully. "And what will you call it?" Amara laughed softly. "I haven't decided yet." Obinna smiled. "Well, when you decide, I'll be your first investor." Amara raised an eyebrow playfully. "You're not buying my dream for me." "I'm not buying it," he said gently. "I'm supporting it." She smiled warmly. "That's different." "Exactly." Their relationship slowly grew stronger with each passing day. Without secrets between them, everything felt easier. They spoke openly about their future, about their dreams, about the kind of life they wanted to build together. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, Obinna suddenly stopped. Amara turned toward him. "What is it?" He took a slow breath. "There's something I've been thinking about." "That sounds serious." "It is." Amara looked curious. "What's on your mind?" Obinna reached into his pocket. For a moment, Amara didn't realize what he was doing. Then she saw the small velvet box in his hand. Her eyes widened. "Obinna." He opened the box slowly. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring, but instead of kneeling dramatically the way people often did in movies, Obinna simply stood in front of her, looking into her eyes. "I've built businesses," he said softly. I've built companies. I've built a life full of success, but none of those things ever made me feel the way you do. Amara felt tears forming in her eyes. You loved me when you believed I was poor. You stood beside me when I had nothing. That kind of love is rare. His voice became emotional, and I don't ever want to lose it. He gently took her hand. Amara, will you marry me? For a moment, Amara couldn't speak. Her heart felt like it might burst from happiness. She remembered the first day she met him, the small roadside stall, the simple meal she bought for him, the rainy evening when they confessed their love. All those memories led to this moment. Yes, she whispered. Obinna smiled widely. Yes, yes. He carefully placed the ring on her finger. Amara laughed through her tears. I can't believe this is happening. Obinna pulled her into a warm embrace. It's happening because we found each other. News of their engagement spread quickly among friends and family. Adiz nearly screamed with excitement when Amara showed her the ring. I knew it, she shouted happily. Amara laughed. You knew what? That you hit the jackpot. Amara shook her head with a smile. That's not why I'm happy. Adiz looked at her suspiciously. You're not happy because he's rich? No. Then why? Amara looked at the ring on her finger thoughtfully. Because he loves me. Adiz rolled her eyes playfully. Well, the money doesn't hurt. They both laughed. The wedding took place a few months later. It was held in a beautiful garden surrounded by flowers and soft music. Friends, family, and business partners gathered to celebrate the occasion. Some whispered excitedly about the unusual love story. The idea of a billionaire disguising himself as a roadside food seller sounded like something from a movie, but for Obinna and Amara, their wedding day felt simple, honest, and real. Amara walked down the aisle in a beautiful white dress she had designed and sewn with her own hands. When Obinna saw her, his face softened with admiration. You made that yourself? He asked. Yes. It's perfect, Amara smiled. You're biased. Maybe, he admitted, but it's still perfect. At the altar, the priest spoke about love, trust, and honesty, words that carried special meaning for two people whose relationship had begun behind a hidden identity. When it was time for their vows, Obinna took Amara's hands. I once believed wealth could give me everything, he said, but I was wrong. You showed me that kindness, honesty, and real love are worth more than any fortune. I promised to spend the rest of my life proving that choosing me was never a mistake. Amara wiped away a tear before answering. When I met you, I thought you were only a hardworking food seller, and I loved you for that. Soft laughter moved through the guests. Now I know you are wealthy and powerful, but the man I truly fell in love with is still the one who stood behind that little roadside stall, shared simple meals with me, and treated me like I mattered. The priest smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Applause filled the garden as Obinna kissed Amara, surrounded by family, friends, music, and joy. Later that evening, Amara leaned toward him. You know I would still love you if you were only a roadside food seller. Obinna laughed softly. And I would still choose you if I had nothing. Looking around at the celebration, Obinna finally understood what real wealth meant. It was not measured in buildings, companies, or bank accounts. It was measured in trust, laughter, peace, and the person who loved you before knowing what you owned. The billionaire who had hidden his identity to find true love had finally discovered the one thing money could never buy. A love that was real,